You've been told your whole life that debt is dangerous, that it's a trap, that it's the reason people stay broke. And for most people, that's absolutely true. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one explains clearly. The problem is not debt itself. The problem is how you use it, and more importantly, how you think. There are two types of people in this world: those who use debt to survive, and those who use it to build. One group is constantly paying for the past. The other is investing in the future. And that difference, subtle on the surface, creates a massive gap over time. Today, you're going to understand how that gap is created, not through luck, not through genius, but through disciplined thinking, controlled risk, and long-term vision. Most people don't lose to debt because debt is powerful. They lose because they never stop to understand what they were agreeing to. They see a monthly payment, not a long-term obligation. They feel relief in the moment of access, not responsibility for the years that follow. That small mental shortcut, focusing on affordability instead of purpose, is where the damage begins. Because once the decision is made emotionally, everything after that becomes reactive. Payments pile up, options shrink, and slowly, without any dramatic collapse, freedom disappears. Look at how this plays out in ordinary life. Someone gets their first stable income and immediately upgrades their lifestyle. A better phone, a finance car, maybe a more expensive place to live. Each decision seems reasonable in isolation. The trade-off is subtle and easy to ignore. Future income is being committed before it's even earned. That means fewer choices later, less flexibility, more dependence on staying exactly where they are. And when something unexpected happens, a job loss, a health issue, even a simple desire to change direction, they realize too late that their past decisions have already locked them in. Now compare that with someone who approaches debt with a colder, more deliberate mindset. They ask a different question. Not, can I manage this payment? But what does this give me in return? That question forces clarity. It strips emotion out of the decision. If the answer is nothing beyond temporary comfort or social validation, the deal becomes hard to justify. But if the debt leads to something productive, something that generates income, builds a skill, or creates future options, then it starts to make sense. Consider a simple example. Two people take on the same amount of debt. One uses it to furnish an apartment with things that look impressive but lose value the moment they're used. The other uses it to learn a skill that increases their earning potential or to start a small side venture. The numbers might look similar at the beginning, but the outcomes are completely different. One is left with declining assets and fixed payments. The other has a chance, never a guarantee, but a real chance, to create something that pays back more than it cost. The uncomfortable truth is that discipline is less about saying no to debt and more about saying no to meaningless debt. That requires patience because meaningful opportunities don't appear every day. It requires focus because distractions are constant and socially rewarded. And it requires accepting trade-offs that aren't visible to others. Driving a simpler car, delaying upgrades, choosing progress over appearance. Most people don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because their attention is scattered across too many short-term desires. Each small, unfocused decision chips away at their ability to make a larger, more important one later. Over time, that pattern compounds, not dramatically, but quietly. And by the time they recognize it, the cost is already built into their life. Access to money has become so easy that people no longer treat it with respect. A few taps on a screen, a quick approval, and suddenly you have funds you didn't earn yet, but are already free to spend. That convenience feels like progress, but it quietly changes behavior. When money is easy to access, discipline has to come from within, and for most people it doesn't. They don't see borrowed money as a tool with a cost. They see it as an extension of their income. And that misunderstanding leads to predictable outcomes. The core idea is simple but uncomfortable to live by. Money that costs you less than it can earn for you is useful. Money that costs you more than it produces is a burden. The gap between those two outcomes is not luck or intelligence, it's restraint. It's the ability to pause and ask what this money will actually do before you use it. Consider two people with access to the same credit line. One uses it to upgrade their lifestyle. Better furniture, newer gadgets, small comforts that make daily life feel improved. There's nothing extreme about it, and that's what makes it dangerous. Each decision feels reasonable. The trade-off is delayed and invisible. Repayments begin to consume future income, and since these purchases don't generate anything, there's no offset. Over time, their financial position becomes tighter, even if their income grows. More of what they earn is already committed. Their options shrink without them noticing. The other person treats that same access very differently. They don't rush to spend it because they don't see access as opportunity by itself. They wait. They look for a situation where that borrowed money can produce something, maybe inventory for a small business, Maybe a piece of equipment that allows them to earn more, maybe an investment with a reasonable expectation of return. The decision takes longer. It feels slower. Sometimes it means doing nothing for a while, which most people find uncomfortable. But when they do act, the intent is clear. The money is expected to come back with more. The difference in outcomes comes from that initial pause. One person acts on impulse and comfort. The other acts on calculation and patience. Over time, this compounds. The first person becomes dependent on maintaining income just to keep up with obligations. The second begins to build small streams that reduce that dependence. It doesn't happen quickly, and it doesn't look impressive in the early stages, but it changes the direction of their life. What makes this difficult is human nature. People want to feel progress now. They want visible improvements, things they can enjoy immediately. Using borrowed money to invest in something uncertain or long-term feels uncomfortable compared to buying something tangible today. But that preference has a cost. It shifts focus away from building capacity and toward maintaining appearance. Discipline in this context is not about avoiding money or fearing it. It's about controlling the impulse to use it without purpose. Every time you choose not to spend borrowed money on something that doesn't produce value, you preserve your ability to use it when it actually matters. And that ability, used correctly even a few times over many years, creates outcomes that impulsive decisions never will. Most people confuse looking stable with being stable. They optimize for appearance because appearance is immediate and visible, while real financial strength is quiet and often delayed. This is where the idea of cash flow becomes uncomfortable, because it forces you to measure reality instead of perception. You can own expensive things, live in a well-furnished space, and still be under constant pressure if nothing you own is putting money back into your life. The pressure may not be obvious at first, but it shows up in your decisions. You hesitate to take risks, you avoid change, and you become protective of your current situation. Not because it's strong, but because it's fragile. The root of the issue is simple. Most people use debt to acquire things that consume cash rather than produce it. The trade-off feels harmless in the moment. A financed car makes daily life more comfortable. A larger home feels like progress. But each of these decisions comes with a fixed outflow of money. Month after month, regardless of your circumstances, that obligation remains. And because these assets don't generate income, the burden falls entirely on your ability to keep earning. That creates a dependency that limits your flexibility over time. Now consider a different approach, one that focuses not on what something looks like, but on what it does. When someone uses debt to acquire an asset that produces cash flow, the dynamic changes. The debt is no longer just an obligation. It becomes part of a system. For example, someone might take a loan to buy a small rental unit. At first, the numbers may be tight. Rent covers the loan, maybe with a small margin. It doesn't feel like a major win. There are responsibilities, maintenance, occasional setbacks. But over time, something important happens. Rent tends to increase. The loan balance decreases. Eventually, the income from that asset exceeds its cost, and what once felt like a burden begins to create space. The key difference lies in direction. One path leads to increasing obligations with no return. The other leads to increasing returns with decreasing obligations. Both require effort, but only one builds momentum. And that momentum is what creates options later in life. It allows you to step back, to make decisions based on preference rather than necessity. What makes this difficult is that the rewards of cash flow are not immediately visible. There is no instant gratification. In fact, the early stages often feel restrictive. Choosing to allocate resources toward something that produces income usually means giving up something that provides immediate comfort or status. That's where most people lose focus. They try to balance both, maintaining a certain image while attempting to build something underneath. The result is divided attention and diluted effort. Neither side is fully supported, and progress slows down. Over time, these small compromises accumulate. A slightly higher expense here, a small indulgence there, and gradually the capacity to invest in income-producing opportunities shrinks. Not because the person lacks ambition, but because their resources are already committed elsewhere. This is how outcomes are shaped quietly. Not through one major decision, but through a pattern of choices that prioritize how life looks over how it functions. Most people say they want security, but what they really want is the feeling of safety without the responsibility of understanding risk. So they avoid anything that looks uncertain, especially when it involves debt. On the surface, that seems reasonable. But avoiding risk entirely doesn't protect you, it limits you. Because the real world doesn't reward caution alone, it rewards informed decisions. And when you refuse to engage with risk, you also refuse the opportunities that come with it. The problem is not risk itself. The problem is unmanaged risk. There's a difference between stepping into something without thinking and stepping into something with clear boundaries. Most people move between two extremes. Either they avoid risk completely, keeping their money idle and their ambitions small, or they take impulsive risks driven by emotion, urgency, or the influence of others. Both paths lead to predictable outcomes. One leads to stagnation, the other to unnecessary loss. The disciplined approach sits in the middle. And it's less comfortable because it requires effort. It means slowing down and asking questions that don't have simple answers. If you take on debt, what is the worst-case scenario? Can you handle it without collapsing your entire financial position? If things don't go as planned, how much time do you have to adjust? What assumptions are you making, and how fragile are they? These questions don't eliminate risk, but they make it visible. And once risk is visible, it can be managed. Consider a simple situation. Someone wants to start a small business and takes on debt to fund it. An impulsive approach would be to borrow as much as possible, assume things will work out, and commit fully without testing anything. The trade-off is hidden at the beginning but becomes obvious later: high pressure, limited room for error, and no buffer if revenue takes time to build. A more disciplined approach would look slower and less impressive. Start smaller, validate demand, keep costs controlled, and borrow only what can be supported even in a weak scenario. The progress is gradual, but the position is stable. What often goes unnoticed is how emotional decisions distort risk. When people feel urgency, they ignore downside. When they feel fear, they ignore upside. Both reactions come from the same place: a lack of clarity. And when clarity is missing, decisions become inconsistent. One moment of overconfidence can undo years of careful effort, while prolonged hesitation can cause missed opportunities that never return. Managing risk also means accepting trade-offs that are not immediately rewarding. It means keeping reserves instead of fully committing your resources. It means saying no to opportunities that look exciting but don't meet your criteria. It means understanding that not every chance is worth taking, even if it promises quick results. This level of discipline is rare because it requires patience and self-control in moments where others are acting quickly. Over time, the difference becomes clear. The person who avoids risk entirely remains in a controlled but limited position, always dependent on what they already have. The person who takes unmanaged risks experiences instability, moving forward and backward without consistency. But the one who learns to measure, limit, and accept risk builds something more durable. Not because they avoided uncertainty, but because they learned how to operate within it without losing control.